If you have a Bible, I encourage you to take it out and turn in it to the book of Genesis, chapter number 20. Genesis, chapter number 20. I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about learning to fear God, or encouraging you and myself to learn to fear God. When I was about in fourth grade or so, I decided, at school, I was peer pressured into cutting a piece of my hair off with some school scissors. And, the idea was just to snip a little bit off the top. Just take a little off the top. And, of course, I couldn't see what I was doing. And I snipped, and it left a big gap right in the top, like just the top front of my head. Well, good, thank you. It's grown back since then. Now the gap is in the back of the head. But when I got home, my parents noticed that the hair was missing, and so they said, obviously, what happened to your hair? And I could see that my parents were not happy with what happened. I had a healthy fear of my parents, and so I lied, and I told them that somebody else at school did it to me. And they said, they got upset. They got more upset. I thought that was going to squash it. They got more upset and said they were going to go talk to that kid's parents. So I even named the kid, and I thought, God, I am in trouble, because once they find out that he didn't do it and that I did it, not only am I going to be in trouble for doing it, I'm going to be in trouble for lying about it too. So I did get in trouble. I don't know that they ever talked to the kid's parents. That never came about, but I did get in trouble for cutting my own hair. But I tell you that story to tell you that both of those, both cases there, me cutting my hair and then lying about it, actually came about because I feared people. I had a sense of, the first one was I feared people in the sense that I wanted their approval. And so I went along with the peer pressure to cut my hair because I wanted them to like me and to be a part of the group, that type of thing. But then I had a fear of my parents, and it was not a fear of approval. It was more an idea of self-preservation, because I knew they were going to get upset. And so both of those instances showed and revealed I let a case of a fear of people guide my choice, one for approval, one for self-preservation. I tell you that because it may not be as immature as cutting your own hair under peer pressure, but it could be in your own life and in our own lives. How many times do we make choices based on the fear of people? How many times do we make decisions and choices in our life based on what we think other people are going to think or what other people are going to say? Now, it may not be as simple and as innocent as cutting your own hair. It could actually be much more serious, to where the fear of someone else can actually lead us to compromise the very convictions we say we hold. To get down to it, the things that we say are non-negotiable. The things that we say will never falter on. The fear of people can cause us to compromise those very things. Listen to Proverbs 29:25 that says this: the fear of mankind is a snare, but the one who trusts in the Lord is protected. In other words, fearing people, living your life and my life in the fear of people, causes us to live trapped to other people. We are trapped by their opinions. We are trapped by their standards. And those opinions and those standards change all the time. All you got to do is live another 24 hours, and the opinions and standards of a human are going to change and fluctuate. And so you're always, just think about how exhausting it is to live fearing people and their opinions and their standards. That every time they change, you have to change. Every time that they have a new idea or a new standard, you've got to get yours to where it's going to fit what they say and what they think. And I don't think anybody here wants to live that way. I don't think anybody wants to live trapped. And I think, too, that you've got to understand that not only do you not want to live that way, but you can't serve God that way. You can't live for the Lord when you live with a fear of people. So what I want to talk to you about today is from Genesis 20, and a story that reminds us how easily it is that fearing people can lead us astray, even for people of faith. So we're not only going to see that, but we're also going to see God's faithfulness in the midst of our own failures, especially in this area. And the bottom line I want to give to you today, what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes is this: to live by faith, we must learn to fear God more than people. To live by faith, we must learn to fear God more than people. So, chapter number 20 of the book of Genesis, coming right out off the heels of the whole incident with Sodom and Gomorrah, we see really a victory in a sense of Abraham, who intercedes, and even though the city is destroyed, but Lot is rescued, much of because the fact that Abraham interceded for Lot. God was judging the sin of that city. But then we come right into chapter 20, and look what happens in verse number 1. It says, "From there, Abraham traveled to the region of the Negev." Now, the Negev is in the southern part of Israel. It's really a desert area. And if I'm not mistaken, the word Negev in Hebrew means south. And so he's actually traveling probably north to get to the Negev, but it's a southern part and it's desert area, and it's kind of along the same level as Gaza would be. And he settled between Kadesh and Shur while he was staying in Gerar. Now, Gerar is south of Gaza. It says, while he's staying there, Abraham said about his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. Now, where have we heard this before? This is not a new thing, right? If you think about when we first started this journey in Abraham's life, back in chapter number 12, God calls Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, and he tells him to go to a land that he's going to eventually find, that God's going to eventually show to him. And he gets on this journey, and God gives him this incredible blessing about what he's going to do with Abraham's life. And the very next thing that happens is a famine happens in the land. They have to move to Egypt for a time to avoid the famine, to get out from under that. And when they get in there, Abraham says to Sarah, "I want you to tell everybody that you are my sister. You're a beautiful lady, and if they see you and know that we're married, they're going to kill me so that they can have you." Well, we know that Pharaoh took Sarah into his home. God made it difficult for Pharaoh until he finally gave her back. And now, it's been years later, Sarah is much older, Abraham is much older, but yet the same sin is popping up in Abraham's life. Look with me in verse number 3. So Abimelech of Gerar, the king, had Sarah brought to him, in other words, to take Sarah as part of his household, to marry her, maybe not because of her beauty, but because Abraham by this point was a pretty powerful, rich man, and it was more of a political, strategic alliance with a powerful man. But then God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, "Lord, would you destroy a nation even though it is innocent? Didn't he himself say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother.' I did this with a clear conscience and with clean hands." In other words, literally it says there, I did this with the integrity of my heart. I did not know. I didn't know. Now, I want you to understand something, just real quick, that Abimelech claims his innocence here. He says, "I didn't know that what I was doing was something wrong." But do you realize that God still held him accountable for what he did wrong? Ignorance is not an excuse for sin. Just because you don't know doesn't mean that it's not wrong. Okay? What happens is whenever we come to understand what's wrong, we've got to have enough humility to say, "I recognize it was wrong, I repent and turn from it, and I go a different direction." Okay? So, here's what happens. God acknowledges that he sees that Abimelech did this unknowingly, and that he did not intend to do anything wrong. And so he says, then God said in verse 6 to him in a dream, "Yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience. I have also kept you from sinning against me." Now, we're not going to delve into this, but isn't that an amazing thought? How many times do you think, we don't even know, but just think about how many times it could be that God kept you from doing something stupid. That you probably are where you are today because God was faithful enough to keep you from making a terrible decision. By the way, God's not obligated to keep you from making that decision. God's not obligated to keep you from the consequences of bad choices. God is not obligated to do that. But God, in his grace and his faithfulness to you, how many times do you think he's probably done that so that you're here today? So, what happens? "I've kept you from sinning against me, therefore I have not let you touch her. Now, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, know that you will certainly die, you and all who are yours." Early in the morning, Abimelech got up, called all his servants together, and personally told them all these things, and the men were terrified. You can imagine. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said to him, "What have you done to us? How did I sin against you that you've brought such enormous guilt on me and on my kingdom? You have done things to me that you should never be done." Abimelech also asked Abraham, "What made you do this?" Now I want you to notice Abraham's response to this. Abraham replied, he actually gives 3 reasons of why it is that he did what he did to cause the problems he did for Abimelech. Verse 11, it says, Abraham replied, "First of all, I thought there is absolutely no fear of God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife." In other words, there's not anybody here who has the same moral standard that I do. They don't fear God, so they just do what they want. Once they see my wife, they're going to kill me to take her. Number 2, besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. In other words, she's my half-sister, and before you think anything, that was normal to do. That was normal to do in the Old Testament. I wouldn't recommend it, because not everything in the Bible is prescriptive, telling us what to do. It's just descriptive, telling us what happened. This is one of those examples. All right? So that's number 2. She really is my sister in a sense, my half-sister. Number 3, verse 13, so when God had me wander from my father's house, I said to her, "Show your loyalty to me wherever we go and say about me, he's my brother." In other words, he's kind of putting all of this on God. God called me from my home and made me wander to a place that I didn't know until he showed me. And I'm kind of worried about what's going to happen. And so, because of that, we made this plan a long time ago that she's just going to tell everybody that I'm her brother, and I'm going to tell everybody she's my sister. So it's just a plan that we did, and we just did it again this time. Okay. Now, let me stop there for just a minute, because I want to key in on verse 11 for just a minute. Look back in verse 11. He says, Abraham replied, I thought there is absolutely no fear of God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife. Now, what's interesting is Abraham believed that the reason that he sinned the way he did, was because he believed there was no fear of God among the people in that city. But you know what he's revealing is not that there was no fear of God in that city, but that Abraham had a fear of man in that city. And in having the fear of man, he did not have a fear of God himself. That's what Abraham is saying. So get this down. The source of fearing people is not trusting in the Lord. If you want to know, just down to the very deep, to the heart of it, why it is that we have a fear of people. And I think everybody deals with this. Everybody deals with this in some way. Even if you are a rebellious type of person, to where you say, I don't care what anybody thinks. Sometimes even your own rebellion is an attempt to get the approval of people, not in the sense that you want them to accept you, but you want them to see you in a certain light. And so that fear of people, that concern with what people think, that concern with what people will say, it comes from our neglect of actually trusting God. Abraham did not trust God was going to provide for him or protect him when he went into this city. And so he lied about his sister, or about his wife being his sister, caused all of these issues with the king's family because he did not trust that God was going to take care of him and give him what he needed. He is more concerned, and sometimes we get more concerned, of what people are going to take from us instead of what God can give to us. Sometimes we get more concerned about what people could do to us than what God would do for us. So let me just share with you some consequences this morning of fearing God, or fearing people instead of God, and then we'll talk about the remedy here in a minute. Let me give you some consequences about fearing people instead of God. The first consequence is this: fearing people can cause us to lie and to deceive. Fearing people can cause us to lie and to deceive. If you don't have to go there, but all the way back in verse number 2, it says, Abraham said about his wife Sarah that she was his sister. Now, we mentioned that Abraham gave the excuse, well, she really is my sister. She's my father's daughter, but not my mother's daughter, so she's my half-sister. So what he's basically doing here is he is telling a half-truth. Now, I want you to understand something. A half-truth is a whole lie. And the reason is because a half-truth many times is intended to deceive. How many times have you gone to tell someone the truth, but you only told half of the truth? What you've done is, sometimes we may even feel good about ourselves that we actually told part of the truth, but really what we've done is we've told a whole lie. Because we've intended to deceive that this is all the truth. We made them think that this is all the truth, when really there is more to be known, more to be said. Now, I want to tell you something that's it's going to be pretty straightforward and a little bit in your face. It's probably going to step on your toes a little bit, okay? I hope you can handle it, okay? You are, and I am, we are never more like the devil than we are lying. When you tell a lie, when I tell a lie, we are never more like the devil than when we do that. If you are living, listen, if you're living in deceit, then you are living like the devil. What does Jesus say about Satan? Jesus says that he is a liar and the father of lies. He's the source of all lies. So if you want to know where lying and deceit came from, it came from the devil. And when you and I live deceitfully, we are living like the father of deceit. So you are never more, and I am never more like the devil than when we are lying. But the fear of people will cause us to lie because we want to be approved, we want to be accepted, or we want to be protected and preserved from the people around us. And so we will lie and deceive in order to do that. Maybe you've seen it in your own life. The second thing that's a consequence of this is fearing people causes us to compromise our integrity. Fearing people causes us to compromise our integrity. In other words, it's very similar to lying, but we're not true all the way through. That's what integrity is. Integrity is to be true all the way through. Through and through, there's truth in us. There's sincerity in us. We're not putting on a mask or a face like Jesus called those hypocrites. And he warned us about people who lived in such a way to present themselves as one thing when they really are another thing. Paul even says that you can't serve Christ that way. But in verse 7, he says, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. Now that's crazy to me to think about. Abraham was the cause of the problem. And God says to Abimelech, you're going to die if you don't return the man's wife, but if you do, he's going to pray for you and you'll be okay. Now, it's not because Abraham was faithful, and we're going to see this in a minute, but it's because God was faithful. But the point there being is Abraham had a reputation as a man of faith, but what really you see in the text is that Abimelech had more integrity than Abraham did. So this deception and fearing of people caused him to compromise his very integrity. And whenever you compromise your integrity, you also compromise your witness. That if you live in a sense of not being true to who God has called you to be and who you claim to be with your mouth, then you ruin the witness. Did you know many people will not even entertain the idea of Christianity, not because they don't like Jesus, but because they don't like Jesus' people. And let me just be very frank and blunt with you. Let me just say that a lot of them have a good case. Now, some of it's a bunch of phooey, but sometimes they've got an argument because of the way that we act. But fearing people causes us to compromise our integrity. Number 3, consequence, fearing people can put others at risk. So notice here that Sarah was put at risk. She went into his house, never know what was going to happen to Sarah. That she was going to be taken to be his wife. Abimelech's house was put at risk. God told him he was going to die, and we didn't read this part. We're going to in just a minute. But actually, God shut up all of the wombs of the women who lived in his house. They could not get pregnant as a judgment against Abimelech for taking Sarah into his home. But not only did it affect and put at risk Sarah and Abimelech, it also put at risk God's plan. Now think about this. What was God going to do? What had God just told Abraham and Sarah back in chapter 18? The men had come and informed, he told Abraham this a long time ago, but he just told Sarah in chapter 18, you're going to have a child that I'm promising to you, that I'm giving to you, who is going to be the seed through which I'm going to bless the entire world, and it's going to be the starting point of a nation that you won't be able to count. But what happens if she goes into Abimelech's home and she has a baby there? It could put at risk the plan of God. But imagine if she even goes there but doesn't get pregnant, but then she gets pregnant later on and it's Abraham's child. There could be this question about, is this child really Abraham's or Abimelech's? You see how it could possibly affect the plan of God. And so Abraham has put all of these people at risk. And the principle of all of this I want to share with you is this, that your sin doesn't just affect you, it affects those around you. There are no victimless sins. Either you're a victim of your sin, or listen, even the sins that don't have to do with anybody else affect people around you because it affects you, and it always affects your relationship with other people. Always. It always does. It always affects. Sin always affects relationships with other people. So there is no victimless sin. Your sin doesn't just affect you, it affects those around you. So it puts people at risk. And then finally, the consequence is this, that fearing people dishonors God. Fearing people dishonors God. Here's how. Because when you fear people instead of fearing God, you put more weight into what people think and say than you do what God thinks and says. Now listen to me. Interesting little Hebrew lesson here. You ready for it? The Hebrew word for glory in the Old Testament is the word kavod. Okay, let's say it together. Kavod. Okay? Didn't that sound okay? Kavod literally means weight or to be heavy. So if you were going to say of something that's heavy, you would say it is kavod. Okay? So what glory is glory is giving more weight to something than to something else. So when you give glory to God, you are giving to God more weight to Him than you are to someone or something else. And when you fear man and fear people instead of fearing God, you are actually giving more glory to humans than you are to God. And so when you do that, you dishonor God by not giving Him the weight that is due to Him, to who He is in His nature and His character and His person. So, those are the consequences. Let me just share with you quickly what the remedy is. All right, it's going to be very simple, but here's the remedy. The remedy is fear God more than people. Okay. Fear God more than people. Now, I'm not talking about be afraid of God, although it would help some of us to be more afraid of God. Okay. But not in the sense that you think God's going to strike you with a lightning bolt if you do wrong. Not in a legalistic way, but just in a sense of there's such a deep respect and honor and reverence for who God is and what He has done that I'm deciding that I'm going to honor God with my life. I'm going to honor Him with the way I think. I'm going to honor Him with the way that I speak, with the way that I act. Everything about my life is going to give God honor because I'm giving Him the greatest weight in my life. I care more about what God thinks than I do about what other people think. So when you're at work and you have to make tough decisions that may affect your progress, your standing in the company, it may even have to affect your pay, it may even affect the fact that you are still a part of the company or a part of the place or whatever it is that you work, then we've got to come to a place to where we make a decision that we're going to fear God more than we fear people. We're going to give God more weight than we give to people. Doesn't mean that we're mean to people or that we dismiss things that we need to think about, but it means that we are going to focus more about what God thinks than we do about what other people think. Whenever you're saying things, you need to think about, is this going to please God, or am I saying this because I'm going to please people? Think about living out your faith publicly. This is a big one, the one that I thought about. When we live out our faith publicly, do we live it out publicly, or do we refrain from living it out publicly because we're more afraid of what people think than what God thinks? Listen to what happens, what Jesus said in John chapter 12. In John chapter 12, Jesus says this right here, or John says this about Jesus. He says in verse 42, "Nevertheless, many did believe in Him," that's Jesus, "even among the rulers, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess Him," that is, openly confess Him, "so that they would not be banned from the synagogue." Evidently, there was a rule that if you confess Jesus and your belief in him, then you couldn't go to the synagogue on the day of worship. For they, look here, verse 43, for they loved human praise more than the praise of God. You know, Paul had to say some pretty hard things to the Galatians. I mean, he was really harsh with the Galatians. He says that they had been bewitched. And then he says this to say, because I'm saying the hard things, he said, I just want you to understand, he's asking a rhetorical question. He says, for am I now trying to persuade people or God? In other words, whose approval am I trying to win? People's approval or God's approval? Or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. You want to know why some of us can't serve God openly? That we can't talk about God openly? We can't talk about Jesus openly? It's because we fear people more than we fear God. Listen, the remedy for the fear of people is a healthy fear of God. That's the remedy. To learn to fear God more than people, to care more about what God thinks, to stop before the decisions, before the words, and say, do I care what God thinks about this more than I think about or care what other people think? Now, this is even true for people who are deciding whether or not they should follow Jesus. I want you to listen to what Jesus said here in the book of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 10, listen to what Jesus says. Jesus tells his disciples, and really everybody listening, he says, don't fear those who kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. Rather, fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. You follow Jesus and you're probably going to hear something about it. Why would you make that decision? That's weak. I mean, that's not very popular. It's not really cool to do that. Oh, good for you, but that's kind of weird, isn't it? You talking about Jesus, you're living for Jesus openly. That's a weird thing to do, isn't it? But don't fear the one who could kill the body, but have more fear of the one who could kill the body and cast the soul into hell. That's pretty straight, isn't it? Again, the remedy for the fear of man is a healthy fear of God. So, fear God more than people. Now, let me just kind of wrap this up by telling you the rest of the story and tell you some good news, because if we think about it, all of us have probably been in a place where we made a decision based on what people thought instead of what God thought. The last part of this is, and get this down, God is faithful in spite of our fears and our failures. So in verse number 14, back in Genesis 20, verse 14, it says this. Then Abimelech took flocks and herds and male and female slaves, gave them to Abraham. So Abraham's getting rich off of this again. I don't know why. I don't know why God would allow Abraham to get rich off of this. Except it's just another example of how God is faithful even when we're not. He returned his wife Sarah to him, and Abimelech said, look, my land is before you. Settle wherever you want. He gave him a choice of where he wanted to go. I don't know why God would allow that to happen, except God is faithful when we're not. And he said to Sarah, look, I'm giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a verification of your honor to all who are with you. In other words, this is a proof that I didn't touch you. By giving this money to him, I'm proving on my honor that I did not touch you. You're fully vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slave so that they could bear children For the Lord had completely closed all the wombs in Abimelech's household on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife. What you see there is that, again, it doesn't seem like something Abraham would be able to do. He just committed a pretty bad sin for the second time to affect people, to put them at risk. And yet God used Abraham to pray and to heal Abimelech and his household. The only answer I can give you is that God was faithful even when we're not. That God still used Abraham even when he was unusable. And that presents really the point I'm trying to make. That even when we are fearful and faithless, God is faithful. Paul says this in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. He says, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. And here's where that comes from. Whenever you and I gave our lives to Christ, here's what happened. When you repented of your sin, you placed your faith in him, what happened was that God forgave you, and then God committed himself to you. And God said, I'm going to commit myself to you no matter what you do. In fact, you even see it all the way back in Genesis 15 when God renews the covenant with Abraham. And do you remember what happened there? It's been a while, I know. It's a really good sermon. You should go check it out. I'm kidding. God recommitted himself to this covenant with Abraham. And it says that when he entered the covenant, he brought a sacrifice and he cut the sacrifice in half and they separated the sacrifice. And in that day, whenever you made a covenant with somebody, you would have a sacrifice to be kind of like the thing that initiated the covenant. But then what would happen? You would separate the sacrifice and you would walk together through the two parts of the animal to say we are entering into this covenant, and if either one of us breaks the covenant, then what happened to the animal should happen to us. So it was like a serious thing to where you're walking through the sacrifice to say, if we don't do this, God's going to hold us accountable for it. But we're committing to one another to keep both our parts of the covenant. Here's what happened with Abraham. God made the covenant. This is so good. Oh my goodness, this is so good. God made this covenant with Abraham. God cut the sacrifice, and then he puts Abraham asleep. And while Abraham is sleeping, God walks through the sacrifice. Why did he do that? Here's what God was saying. God's saying, I'm not only committing to keep my part, I'm committing to keep yours. So that if you don't keep your part, when you're unfaithful, I'm still going to be faithful. Now listen, when you entered into a relationship with God through his son Jesus, God committed himself to you and he said, I don't care what happens here. I don't care what you do. I am going to be faithful. And listen, if I ever went back on my commitment to you, I would not only be denying you, I would be denying myself. That's what you get when you enter into a relationship with Jesus. A faithful God, faithful to you even when you are faithless. So let me just ask you something. How many times have you chosen to fear people more than you fear God? How many times have you denied God so that you could win the approval of someone else? And I wonder, as you think about that, who it is that needs to say, God, I need to be more concerned about what you think than what everybody else does. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to choose to enter into a relationship with you by faith. Maybe you've never been saved. Stop worrying about what everybody else thinks. stop worrying about it. Everybody in this building who is saved, if you come and you give your life to Christ, I'll tell you what they'll think. They will rejoice with heaven that you did it. But even if they don't, then they need to get saved. Okay? But you, Christian, listen. And I'm talking to myself. Like, some of us need to make a tough decision because God would be more pleased with it. Some of us need to say the hard thing because God would be more pleased with it. Some of us need to walk more faithfully in spite of the opposition because God would be pleased with it. And maybe you just want to say this morning, God, I'm committing myself with your help, I'm committing myself to do what pleases you more than what would please anybody else. And God, I just want to say thank you. I just want to say thank you that even when I'm fearful and faithless, that you are faithful. Hey, Pastor Justin here. Just wanted to say thank you for joining us online for worship today. We hope that you are encouraged. If you feel like you need to make a decision, you have questions, or you just need prayer, you can get in touch with us by using the contact information on the screen. We also hope that you'll take the next step and you'll join us in person. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.